20-year-old Tennessee man Spencer Boston appeared in Wilson County Court on January the 27th of 2020 for a simple marijuana possession charge. As he stood before Judge Haywood Barry, Boston began expressing his views on why marijuana should be legalized. In the moments that followed, he decided to punctuate his arguments by reaching into the pocket of his jacket, pulling out a joint and lighting it up in front of the judge. As seen in court footage, the young man was able to take multiple puffs before law enforcement grabbed him and escorted him out of the courtroom. Lieutenant Scott Moore, a spokesman for the Wilson County Sheriff Office, reported that Boston said something to the effect of "the people deserve better" as he was being led out. His actions resulted in him being jailed for 10 days after Judge Barry held him in contempt of the court. The joint he smoked was collected as evidence and found to contain a strong strain of marijuana. Boston was charged with disorderly conduct and simple possession for what his lawyer described as a peaceful, orderly protest. Through his legal representative, the man insisted that he wasn't trying to carry out a cheap stunt and that his actions were meant as a stand against the criminalization of marijuana. Boston, who wore a wide smile in his processing photo, stated, "We must follow the money, the billions that are made by keeping a non-lethal medicinal herb illegal." The man's courtroom display made national and international headlines. Some criticized him for being disrespectful in court, but others called him a hero for the marijuana legislation cause. By February of 2020, a GoFundMe page entitled "Free Spencer Boston" had raised $7,240. Number 10. Richard Kirk. 44-year-old Denver woman Christine Kirk made a distressed call to the police on April the 14th of 2014, claiming that her husband Richard was hallucinating after he had eaten a pot candy. Speaking from her Observatory Park home, Christine told the operator that she was scared because her husband had gone to their gun safe. While Christine was still on the phone, Richard grabbed a pistol, pressed it against her head and pulled the trigger, killing her. He then handed the weapon to the youngest of the couple's 3 children and asked the boy to kill him. The latter didn't open fire and Richard was arrested for first-degree murder. During the legal proceedings that followed, Richard claimed that he'd suffered a psychotic reaction to the marijuana edible. Before he was due to go on trial for murder in 2015, he changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. Following the shooting, a half-eaten Karma Candy Orange Ginger Chew was found in the couple's home. The legally purchased marijuana candy had more than 100 milligrams of THC, the psychoactive substance in the drug that would have influenced Richard's perception of reality. In Colorado, the definition of one edible dose of THC was 10 milligrams. The authorities didn't comment on how the drug would have played a part in the shooting, but did note that the concentration of THC in Richard's blood was low. To be considered driving impaired, he would have needed to have 5 nanograms of THC per milliliter of blood, and his tests revealed 2.3 nanograms. Richard had been consuming edibles as part of his recovery from the use of opioids, which he'd taken for back pain. There were, however, reasons to suspect that the shooting had been intentional and not a consequence of drug use. Christine's parents, Marty and Wayne Conkey, reported that they didn't get along with Richard and that they saw him being emotionally abusive towards their daughter. The couple were experiencing financial difficulties and fought often, with Christine revealing to a friend that she'd become fearful of her husband. 3 months before the shooting, the woman told her parents that she planned on leaving him. Prosecutors pointed out that in spite of his alleged delusions, Richard had had the wherewithal to remember the code to the gun safe and put the pistol to Christine's head. Nevertheless, the man maintained that he'd killed his wife due to a reaction to the marijuana candy. In 2016, the Conkeys sued 2 marijuana businesses that had sold edibles to their son-in-law for failing to warn him about their potential side effects. In February of 2017, Richard pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, thus avoiding a potential life sentence. As part of the deal, he relinquished the parental rights to his and Christine's sons, who were adopted by the latter's family. In the spring of 2017, Richard was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Number 9. Matthew Leatham. In the winter of 2021, a young Florida man was arrested after he called 911 twice, asking for a ride home. 22-year-old Matthew Leatham, who was suspected of being high on marijuana at the time, demanded a lift and cursed at the operator during the first call. An officer made contact with Leatham and offered to call him a taxi, but he claimed that he didn't have any money and started walking home. Leatham, who had a tattoo depicting the map outline of Florida in the middle of his forehead, contacted the authorities once more asking for a ride, after which he was arrested. The man was charged with misuse of the emergency system as well as marijuana possession. Number 8. Chris Appleby. In the fall of 2021, law enforcement in Lawrence County, Tennessee, raided the property of 33-year-old Amish man Chris Appleby. He had joined the Etheridge Amish community 7 years prior because he reportedly wanted to kind of slow down and live the slow life. The authorities executed a search warrant at the home following repeated complaints from within the community. They found a fully functional greenhouse in which Appleby grew and dried marijuana, preparing it to be sold. Detective Jason Janka told the media that he and his partners were mind-boggled by how it was right there, adding, "There's bad apples in every crowd, but I never thought it would be this big, especially with this amount of marijuana." The police seized 25 pounds of the drug from 2 separate buildings. As seen in a photo taken at the scene, it was stored in several glass jars, plastic containers and plastic bags. Officers also recovered 13 firearms, including shotguns and assault rifles. Appleby was arrested and charged with 4 separate counts related to drugs and firearms. Number 7. Victor Yanez. For months leading up to the spring of 2018, Colombian man Victor Yanez was subject to an investigation by Homeland Security's Violent Gang Task Force for his operations in Florida. A focus of the investigation was Yanez's social media profiles, where the man posted photos and videos depicting his lavish lifestyle. The content showed the 25-year-old wearing expensive jewelry, hanging out with celebrities such as rapper Rick Ross, driving luxury vehicles and going on spending trips to Las Vegas. He was also seen drinking a cough syrup-laced beverage called Lean, also known as Purple Drank, which had been popularized as a recreational drug in the hip-hop community since the 1990s. The drink was usually a mixture of a soft drink, hard candy, and a prescription-grade cough or cold syrup containing the opiate codeine. Yanez first became visible to Florida law enforcement in 2016 when he was found to be in possession of counterfeit labels used to hide illegal bottles of codeine-based syrup. Then in September of 2017, Yanez was spotted speeding in the Florida Keys while behind the wheel of a Mercedes-Benz. After law enforcement initiated a traffic stop, Yanez pulled over, jumped into the back seat and switched places with his female passenger. When a deputy went to talk to Yanez through the open window, he could smell marijuana emanating from inside the vehicle. Yanez admitted that he didn't have a valid driver's license and was arrested. The passenger, who was not named, said that she was only trying to help out Yanez and she didn't face any charges. After Yanez had already been taken into custody, deputies searched the Mercedes and found a bag of marijuana on the back seat. The man faced reckless driving on a suspended license, marijuana possession, and felony evidence tampering charges. Later that same month, law enforcement raided the Miami condo of Yanez's girlfriend, Joely Cardoso. The woman was found soaking bottles of illegal cough syrup in a bathtub. She told law enforcement that her boyfriend was a major supplier of marijuana and illegal cough syrup, who had access to the latter substance through a pharmacy contact. Cardoso confessed that Yanez fronted her 12 syrup bottles and taught her how to soak them to remove the labels before replacing them with counterfeit prescription labels. At the woman's home, the authorities found over 100 counterfeit labels as well as 2,274 grams of marijuana and 1,004 grams of MDMA. Cardoso was taken into custody, but the authorities decided to hold off on arresting Yanez and continued investigating him to build a larger case. Once Homeland Security agents and Miami-Dade police had enough evidence, they raided his $800,000 Doral home in April of 2018. As officers burst through the door, Yanez confronted them armed with an AK-47 assault rifle, but he was taken into custody without incident. At his home, the police found dozens of counterfeit cough syrup prescription labels and thousands of dollars in cash. They also retrieved 105 pounds of marijuana and 91 vials of cannabis oil. Yanez was charged with armed trafficking, possession of counterfeit prescription labels, and possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, among other charges. Number 6. John Jimenez. On March the 14th of 2014, New York City man John Jimenez awoke to the NYPD knocking on the door of his Brooklyn apartment. The officers were reportedly acting on a tip from August of the previous year, which had led them to believe that the 49-year-old had an illegally owned gun. When Jimenez opened the door, officers spotted a small amount of marijuana on his living room table. Jimenez subsequently testified that the cops assured him they were strictly looking for firearms and that they wouldn't charge him with anything else if he consented to a search of his apartment. Jimenez would later state, "I signed the paper like a fool." No gun was found, but the police ended up discovering 10 pounds of marijuana stored in plastic bags. Jimenez was arrested and faced felony and misdemeanor charges of marijuana possession. In the late spring of 2013, Supreme Court Justice Michael Gary deemed the police search illegal. Gary highlighted several aspects pertaining to the police's behavior on the night in question, stating, "I find that everything that they did after they got to the door was not proper." The judge deemed that the police had no legitimate reason for being at Jimenez's address aside from a stale 7-month-old gun tip, and that they had basically coerced the man into signing a consent form without informing him of his right to refuse the search. One of the officers previously stated that Jimenez had readily granted them permission to look through the apartment and that it hadn't taken any convincing on their part. Gary described that notion as preposterous. Given the large quantity of marijuana he had in his home, Jimenez had no criminal record and faced up to 15 years behind bars if convicted, but it was unclear what became of the criminal case. Number 5. Douglas Perry Christopher. In early December of 2019, the sheriff's office in Washington County, Ohio, announced that they were looking for 51-year-old Douglas Perry Christopher. He was a registered Tier 3 offender who was convicted of battery of an intimate nature in March of 2010. Christopher was released from prison in the fall of 2013 and was legally required to check in with the sheriff's office every 90 days. A warrant for his arrest was released after he'd failed to provide a change of address, with his last known residence being in Belpre, Ohio. The police's public plea gained considerable attention online, particularly due to Christopher's unusual mugshot. The bearded, long-haired man had tattooed eyebrows as well as a cannabis leaf in the center of his forehead, framed by the words "pothead." His other tattoos included a cross on his back, the words "Lone Wolf" on his fingers, and theater masks accompanied by "Laugh Now, Cry Later" on his right leg. Christopher was described as weighing 230 pounds on a 5'10" frame, and the public were urged to keep their distance and immediately contact law enforcement upon spotting him. Number 4. Robert Kelley. Over the course of 2 days in mid-September of 2018, over 100 pounds of marijuana, wrapped in large bundles, washed up on the shores of Flagler and Volusia counties in Florida. Before the police arrived at the various spots where the drugs had surfaced, a number of people were seen tearing into the giant bundles and stealing individual packages. One particularly incriminating photo showed a blonde, bikini-clad woman smiling as she was crouched over the plastic packaging with her hand deep inside it. The Flagler County Sheriff's Office released the photo as part of their public appeal for information regarding the beachgoer's identity. One man, Robert Kelley, was identified by witnesses as being among the people seen tampering with the packages. When the police arrived at the scene, they questioned Kelley and found a brick of marijuana wrapped in a brown towel in the trunk of his car. He denied taking the 11-pound package from the bundle and claimed it had washed ashore separately. When asked why he hadn't called the sheriff's office, the man stated that he wasn't sure deputies would attend the scene. Kelley, whose only defense for taking the drugs was that others were attempting to do the same thing, was arrested for possession of more than 20 grams of marijuana. Number 3. Paul Stoner. In the summer of 2014, Virginia law enforcement received reports that a man was selling drugs to minors in Orange County. On August the 14th, the authorities raided the Unionville home of 42-year-old Paul Stoner and found that he had a cannabis growing operation on his property. Deputies from the Blue Ridge Narcotics and Gang Task Force found over $10,000 worth of cannabis plants at the home, as well as drug paraphernalia, prescription medication, and multiple firearms. Stoner was arrested and charged with possession of a firearm and manufacturing marijuana. Some of the media outlets reporting on the man's arrest made tongue-in-cheek references on the case, including that Stoner had lived up to his name. Today's topic was requested by D-Rock420 and Tristan Rebel 718. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Brandon Clay Weed. In the summer of 2017, a man named Weed was arrested for trafficking marijuana by law enforcement in Oklahoma City. 19-year-old Brandon Clay Weed was taken into custody as he tried to flee through the backyard of a home in the 8700 block of NW90. At the address where the teenager lived with his girlfriend, Vanessa Yahola, and her family, the police found nearly 10 pounds of marijuana, about $45,000 in cash, scales, bongs, 2 assault-style rifles, a shotgun, and 3 handguns. The incident marked Weed's 3rd drug arrest in a space of less than a calendar year. On March the 3rd of 2016, he was arrested for possessing Xanax and marijuana with intent to distribute. Then in late December, law enforcement tracked him and Yahola down to an apartment in the 4100 block of Northwest Expressway. An officer spotted a suitcase in the entryway to the apartment. He questioned Yahola, who revealed that it held drugs. Upon opening it, the officer found 2 large bags of high-grade marijuana, packaging material, and a large marijuana bong. Stick around after number 1 if you have missed our episode about when just trying to relax goes wrong from a while back. That's coming right up. Number 1. Adrienne Munju. 41-year-old Canadian woman Adrienne Munju was jailed for 11 years in October of 2024 by a Nigerian court after she was caught trying to smuggle over 77 pounds of cannabis into the country. According to the National Drug Law Enforcement Agency, the incident occurred early in October when Munju was intercepted at the Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos. She was found to be in possession of a strong synthetic cannabis strain called Canadian Loud. 74 packages of the drug were found split between 2 of her 3 bags. Munju pleaded guilty to 2 drug trafficking charges at the earliest opportunity. The woman claimed that she was roped into smuggling the drugs through an online platform with the promise of $7,000 upon successful delivery. Munju claimed that she needed the money for the master's degree she was pursuing in Canada. A legal representative asked the court for leniency, arguing that the woman had pleaded guilty without wasting the court's time, that she was very remorseful, and that she had no relatives or acquaintances in Nigeria, having been abandoned by everyone. Munju was given the option of paying a $65,000 fine for both counts, but she was unable to secure it, resulting in her conviction. Number 8. Gerald Peavy. In late January of 2021, Norris Hargrove was a guest in the home of 48-year-old Gerald Peavy in the Laurel Oaks neighborhood of Houston, Texas. At around 11:30 p.m., as Hargrove was roaming alone through the house, he found a handgun in the living room. He pulled the trigger, assuming the weapon wasn't loaded, and it discharged. A bullet went through the wall and into the master bedroom where Peavy was relaxing with his wife. The projectile cut through the TV and then fatally struck Peavy. His wife was distraught but physically unharmed in the incident. Initially, the family thought they'd been targeted in a drive-by and called 911. Hargrove explained the situation to the responding officers, who subsequently took him into custody. As reported by the Harris County District Attorney's Office, manslaughter charges were pending against him. Number 7. Sirin Murad. In June of 2022, London beautician Sirin Murad was vacationing in Sunny Beach on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. At some point during her holiday, she fell asleep by the pool, but had forgotten to put on sunscreen. Her face was red and slightly sore when she woke up, but the 25-year-old didn't think much of it and continued relaxing. The following day, however, she was in pain, and the skin on her forehead got so tight that it looked like it was made out of plastic. Murad later shared selfies on social media, to which a number of users reacted by pointing out that when she furrowed her eyebrows, the young woman resembled a Klingon, the fictional alien race from the Star Trek universe. Murad began experiencing relief when her burnt forehead eventually started peeling, leaving patches of pink and tanned skin. By August, she'd fully recovered, but shared her story as a warning for internet users to always wear sunscreen. Unprotected exposure to ultraviolet B rays can result in damage to skin cell DNA, thus causing defects and mutations that, among other afflictions, can lead to skin cancer. Number 6. Emily Weinman. On May the 26th of 2018, 2 seasonal police officers were involved in a physical altercation with 20-year-old Emily Weinman as she was visiting a beach in Wildwood, New Jersey. Weinman had her 18-month-old daughter with her at the time and was also accompanied by her boyfriend and a female friend. As shown in subsequently released body cam footage, she was approached by Thomas Cannon and Robert Jordan, Class 2 officers typically hired by Jersey Shore towns during busy summer months. They suspected Weinman of underage drinking and asked her to take a breathalyzer test on account of an unopened alcoholic beverage that was in her proximity. Weinman passed and maintained she hadn't been drinking or done anything wrong, but the officers remained in the area. Tensions escalated, and when the young mother refused to give the officers her full name, Cannon told her that she was about to get dropped. Weinman was then wrestled to the ground by Cannon and Jordan, who twisted her arms, pulled her hair, and pushed her face in the sand while repeatedly telling her to stop resisting. Weinman screamed for help from her companions, and her young daughter could be heard crying in the background. One of the officers was shown in the footage repeatedly punching Weinman in the head with a closed fist and then placing her in a chokehold. The woman screamed, "They're choking me, and I cannot breathe," but the officers persisted in their attempts to restrain her. Footage of the incident subsequently went viral, and many users were critical of what they argued was excessive use of force on the officers' part. Weinman was taken away for processing and faced several charges, including 2 counts of aggravated assault on a police officer, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Cannon and Jordan had claimed that she'd attacked them while she was seemingly inebriated. They were never charged in connection to the incident. Weinman pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct in 2019. Her other charges were dropped, and she was banned from Wildwood for a year. She subsequently sued the city in federal court, alleging she'd been brutally and senselessly assaulted by the officers, while also accusing them of lying and fabricating evidence against her. A settlement was reached in 2020, and Weinman received $325,000. Number 5. Jackson Perry and Noah Palmer. 2 Australian men had to be rescued after drifting out to sea on an air mattress off the coast of Mandurah, south of Perth, in early 2021. Jackson Perry and Noah Palmer pumped up an old mattress they'd found at the latter's home, put some beers in the icebox, and went into the water. They planned to stay within a few hundred feet of the shoreline at most. Perry later told a media outlet, "Before we knew it, we were pushed out at sea. The wind had pushed the air mattress into open water, and the men kept drifting as they couldn't paddle against the strong current." Palmer claimed that their stress escalated upon realizing they were low on beer. Their phones were also running out of battery, but they managed to place a call for help. The 2 men then faced the difficult task of staying afloat until the arrival of rescuers, as they'd started sinking due to previously undetected holes in the mattress. Palmer would reportedly jump off it every 10 minutes and blow it back up. By the time that Mandurah volunteer rescuers reached them, the men had been adrift for several hours and had floated more than 2 miles from shore. They emerged from the incident largely unscathed and were in high spirits upon being found. Nevertheless, the authorities warned copycats that what had concluded as a light-hearted story for Perry and Palmer could have easily turned deadly. Number 4. Anna Lee Haldeman. On July the 15th of 2019, a confrontation between 2 women occurred at Compo Beach in Westport, Connecticut. An unnamed New York woman had driven to the beach with her children. Upon arrival, she noticed an older man accompanied by a woman later identified as 28-year-old Anna Lee Haldeman, whom she'd subsequently described in a social media post as belligerently drunk. About an hour into the beach visit, Haldeman removed the top of her bathing suit. The woman approached her and asked that she cover up, explaining that she had her children with her. As the mother recounted, both Haldeman and her male companion proceeded to speak unpleasantries to her. As the conflict escalated, Haldeman removed her top once more, as well as the bottom half of her swimsuit, exposing her buttocks before bending over in full view of the woman and her children. Haldeman and her companion were escorted off the beach by security. In her Facebook post, the woman claimed that Westport authorities were doing nothing and accused the town of covering something or someone up in connection to the incident. However, following an investigation, a warrant was issued for Haldeman's arrest on charges of risk of injury to a minor, a felony, and second-degree breach of peace, a misdemeanor. She turned herself in to Westport police on August the 17th and apologized for her behavior, but maintained having no recollection of what she'd done on the day in question. For the felony charge, she faced a potential sentence of up to 10 years in prison and a fine of up to $10,000. She was released after posting her $50,000 bail. Haldeman's arrest occurred around the same time that the Supreme Court in nearby New Hampshire upheld the convictions of 3 women who'd been arrested for going topless on a Laconia beach in 2016. Heidi Lilly, Kia Sinclair, and Ginger Piero were part of the Free the Nipple campaign and protested the state's law barring women from being topless in public, arguing it was a form of gender discrimination. Number 3. Tonya Robinson. An unnamed 31-year-old woman from Cheviot, Ohio, pulled into a parking lot of Glenmore Avenue in the early fall of 2018. As she parked her Jeep Cherokee, she reportedly got distracted and moments later heard a neighbor yelling. As the woman had been maneuvering her SUV, she'd accidentally run over 45-year-old Tonya Robinson, who'd been sunbathing in the parking lot. Robinson became trapped underneath the vehicle, but the driver, her neighbor, and other residents managed to pull her out. Robinson, a mother of 3 and grandmother of 5, suffered critical, crushing injuries. First responders performed CPR on her before transferring her to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center, where she was pronounced dead. The driver who'd run her over maintained that she hadn't seen her lying on the ground and faced no criminal charges in the immediate aftermath. Number 2. Edward Stainer. On November the 16th of 2019, David Clark returned to his home in the town of Basingstoke, England, to find his grandfather dead. Clark, a 93-year-old Edward Stainer, a decorated World War II veteran, had lived together for roughly 10 years. In the weeks leading up to his demise, Stainer had had problems with the remote control of his electric armchair, as nothing happened when he pressed the buttons. Clark eventually got it fixed. On the day of his death, Stainer had been relaxing in the chair when at some point he made the wrong move and fell to the floor. In doing so, he inadvertently pressed a button on the remote that operated the electric footrest. It lowered onto his head and trapped his neck. As later explained by Clark, the footrest was so far between his chin and his chest, you couldn't see his face. The incident resulted in Stainer fatally suffocating. Number 1. Vladimir Marugov. Oligarch Vladimir Marugov was nicknamed Russia's Sausage King and owned some of the country's largest meat processing plants. On November the 2nd of 2020, the 54-year-old meat mogul was relaxing in the sauna with his partner, Sabina Gaziyeva, at his estate in Istra near Moscow. It was late at night when two masked men broke into the sauna and tied the couple up, demanding cash and valuables. Gazieva escaped the building naked by jumping through a window, vaulted a fence on the estate, and then called the police from a neighbor's house. When officers arrived at the scene, they found that Maragov had been shot with a crossbow and tortured by the intruders. He'd succumbed to massive blood loss. Law enforcement retrieved the Citroen used by the attackers from the Istra village, but by then, they'd fled on foot into nearby woods. The two men involved in the attack were eventually detained by the Russian Investigative Committee and identified as Alexander Mavridi and Pavel Akhmedov. At the time of his brutal killing, Maragov was involved in a high-profile property dispute with his ex-wife, poet Tatiana Maragova. Mavridi, aged 50, was an associate of Tatiana's, and they were rumored to have been in a relationship, although investigators found no evidence of it. In 2021, Mavridi escaped from an Istra detention center but was recaptured in Moscow following a 5-week manhunt, after he was detected by the city's facial recognition surveillance cameras. Once he was brought back into custody, Mavridi admitted that he'd killed Maragov in a twisted attempt to impress and win over Tatiana, whom he had hopes of marrying. As reported by an agent of the investigative committee, the poet had confided in Mavridi that she'd grown weary of arguing over property with her ex. Mavridi claimed that he had a way to make the oligarch leave her alone, and Tatiana seemed excited by the idea. She allegedly had never fathomed it meant murder and wasn't considered a suspect by investigators. Gazieva passed a polygraph on TV to dispel rumors she'd been involved in Maragov's death. She told viewers that she found it strange that Mavridi and Tatiana knew each other in a city as large as Moscow. It was interpreted as her implying that the woman, once her love rival, had played a more active role in Maragov's death. Thanks for watching. Would you rather fully legalize marijuana or have free healthcare? Let us know in the comments section below.